Ayan. So we've been using Judith Butler as the main anchor for this discussion. So main na anchor pa. But just to remind, no, we mentioned a while ago also other people like De Beauvoir, Mulvey, and Serrano. But I have chosen performativity as the foundation for this presentation. Medyo maganda rin kasi yung ano niya, the theory that she created. No? Her contribution to intellectual, political, and discursive knowledge is the idea of performativity. No? Later, I will explain further why I chose performativity. But because we already introduced the idea of determinacy and indeterminacy, meaning the oscillation, oscillation of what is stable and unstable, clear and unclear, definite and indefinite, flux and stasis. So we have gestured towards that. Since we have introduced that idea, I will introduce another person also. So si Derrida. So why am I introducing Jacques Derrida? So if you've heard the term deconstruction, yung mga sakpo teachers ko, I'm sure ginagamit natin yan sa school. No? So that term, just to clarify, to give proper credit, so Derrida got that term, yung deconstruction, from Martin Heidegger. I will not define deconstruction because that's another lecture. However, I can say that the entire lecture itself, right from the start, we have been doing deconstruction, wherein sa simula pa lang, when we were trying to define what is gender, what we did was that borrows a basic conception of what is gender from a slide, from some other feature, and then we put it in the slide. And yet we broke it down into its components, and each component, it has its own conventions, associations, implications, biases, diba? Embedded on those words or in those terms, no? So siguro we can say that deconstruction is breaking down ideas into smaller pieces and then try to elucidate whatever associations that are inherent or at least embedded in those ideas. But I was reminded by Dr. Barbasa, one of our guests before, that when you say deconstruction, it's a loosening up. It's not necessarily a breaking down. So if you go to Derrida, you would see that his works focus on reinterpreting things to emphasize that whatever meaning that we have, they are unstable because meanings are composed of other meanings. One of the ideas that gender studies have been questioning or have been challenging is the idea of binary thinking, wherein there is right and wrong, light and dark, high and low, male, female, masculinity, femininity. And Derrida was saying that these terms are unstable, wherein what holds the meaning of a term, when I say woman, for example, or man, is an association of other meanings. So it's a network. It's a network of relationships, of meaning, ideas, concepts, frameworks, biases, preferences. So it is unstable. And for me, ang tinatry kong gamitin for my paper is that everything is indeterminate until we perform determination. So actually, that's a character of difference. No? And then in other classroom discussions and even in public discourse, we also have heard yung centers and margins, no? So yung decentering, that's also from Derrida. Just to remind, no? So margins is basically the conception that there is a center and then there's a margin. O yung parang na-relegate to the side or na isang tabi. Ginamit nga ni Lenny yan sa kampanya yan. So ginamit niya yung term na laylayan. However, mali yung interpretation ni Isko Moreno. Pero nevertheless, so you can look for it, no? So during the election, iba yung basa ni Isko about the meaning of laylayan. And that actually highlights the idea that, again, words are unstable and words would mean different from one person to another. So if we are assuming that we will come up with one final definite definition, I think one of the idea of Derrida is that we will not reach it. So why did I introduce? No? Parang the question, so you're just making everything more complicated. Well, it's up to you. If you think that it's creating more confusion, I can't do anything about it. But I'm explicating this relationship between photography and gender in this manner. It's up to you if you would ascribe to the method that I have chosen. But nevertheless, at the start of this lecture, I have also emphasized that the way I am going to structure or establish, or at least the way I'm going to flesh out gender representation in Philippine photography is through thematic analysis. So just to clarify, kasi kanina yung first part is to establish the meanings or at least characterizations of words and structure. From here on out, what we're going to do is that we're going to jump from performativity, deconstruction, and representation. But those ideas will be in a flux as well So the reason that I made parang some mental exercises a while ago is for us to be conscious on how meaning, performativity, and representation is demonstrated when we look at photographs. We will be seeing images, and when you read from here on out, it's going to be more fluid. The determination will be on you. There's going to be an exercise of an imposition of agency. So what are the themes that I'm going to use? So number one, history and appearances. Number two is popular media, aesthetics and conventions, participation in practice, the corporate motive, agency and product, and lastly, some recent updates. For example, si Hannah and also si Kimberly, they just won awards from the World Press Photo this week. So yun, so kasama siya doon sa recent updates. I understand there's going to be some teachers who will see this. I hope. I hope. Para at least I need feedback din kasi. So ano ba yung methodology ko? Parang nga siyang thesis defense, no? What I did in trying to address this question of gender representation in Philippine photography, I called materials, I documented materials from different areas of Philippine photography. So, well, I have photography chismis. So, I have been building some materials from photography chismis. But I also had to gather more information that is outside for this lecture to mean something, or at least to find some level of credibility naman. In short, what I did was to make a big mess out of this concept, gender representation in Philippine photography, in the sense that I had to gather a lot of materials that I think are demonstrations of this concepts of gender representation in Philippine photography, put them in parang 100 slides, and then I had to sequence and arrange them. And then the themes actually happened contingently, meaning it happened after I have seen all the images. So there is a process of sequencing and selection that was done. If you're going to say that that sequencing and selection is a biased or at least a gendered process, then I think maybe yes and maybe no. So again, this is a work in progress, no? But for now, ang i-argue ko naman is that, as I said, determination is held in time. Meaning, if I did make some determinations by virtue of me creating themes, these themes are unstable. However, they would have determination as of the moment. So everyone is free to question these themes. So I am open to that. So that's why I like the idea of indeterminacy, because it allows a continuation of discourse or at least discussion, in the sense that if I put something here, I am inviting people to question it. And I think questioning or speculation or even judgments from other people is not a bad thing. The lecture will be subject to a lot of criticism. And to be clear about this, I welcome criticism, and hopefully someone will message me and tell me, Tony, I want to do a commentary presentation on what you have presented. So at least we continue the discourse. Now we build a knowledge base of claims and counterclaims, thesis and antithesis. And at the end, we have a synthesis. Then we have discourse of Philippine photography finally, or at least at the part wherein we connect Philippine photography to gender representation. So yeah. Okay, first. First pa lang, wow! So yeah, so as I mentioned a while ago, there's one part of critical theory which is context. And one of the areas of context is historical context. I think kanina yung word na appearances, photography is associated with appearances. And those appearances could be representative of objects and subjects in the world. But the question is, in the representation, are we able to keep the essence, or are we able to represent that subject properly? In the sense that obviously the representation is not the complete reality of what it is being copied. So kaya nasabi natin mediatic facsimile. No? So that idea of appearances would come up as we go along. So I'm showing this as grounding, or siguro parang establishment of when we talk about history of Philippine photography based on documents. This is one of two oldest extant photographs of the Philippines. These are the oldest photographs that are existing of the Philippines. I'm not saying in the Philippines, of the Philippines, meaning the image, the representation of the world in the image. What is represented in the image is the Philippines. Okay, so kaya rin kanina I had to establish the difference of what is in the image and what is outside the image. The point of me showing this is that if we're going to have a point of departure historically, then we can answer what is the first photograph of the Philippines. And given that if we're going to ask about gender, obviously here wala tayong makikita. You can say that there are no people here, but if you have knowledge, or at least if you have an idea on how the daguerreotypes work, exposure times are around 5 to 15 minutes or 20 minutes depending on the light conditions, no. So probably there are actually people there, but you can see them because those people are moving. So hindi sila nagre-register ng image. May theory din about it. You can say so much things about it, no? To a certain extent, again, it questions the facticity of what is recorded in an image. So when we say that this photo is empty, are you sure it's empty? Or is it a limitation of the medium itself at that time? Actually, what you are sure of this image is the external world, which is the Philippines, and the agent looking at it. So the agent who created this image, this was created by Jules Itier. So ironic that the photograph is not created by a Spanish, no, it's a French. And this was created in 1844. So ano yung title? So View the Faubourg this well, I'm not French. So basa-basahin niyo lang. Pero ang idea lang dyan is, in English, Faubourg is French to refer to a town. So what town is represented in the image is the town of San Miguel in Manila. So if we're going to ground something in history, this is the first photograph of the Philippines. So far, there is no discussion of gender here, but it also lays the ground for the idea of representation. What is in the image? The facticity of the image and the historical and geographical and political and commercial aspects that are embedded in what we think is Philippine photography. You have to remember that photography was used as a tool for commerce. So the Lagren mission was in relation to commerce. So Jules Etier is a French customs inspector. He's male and he's French, so he's not Filipino. And he's a customs inspector. So the purpose of him being in the Philippines is for business. So why is a French guy in the Philippines? Obviously, there is commerce happening in the Philippines. The Philippines is one of the crown jewels of the Spanish monarchy. No? Spain thrived because of the Philippines. Well, among other colonies. But the Philippines had a special part in the economy and also the power of Spain. We were in the center of trade in Southeast Asia. If you're asking, di ba so si Sinibaldo de Mas yung nagdala ng photography sa Philippines? Yes, according to documents. But so far, there is no extant image or there is no extant photograph that could substantiate the claim that it was Sinibaldo de Mas who brought photography to the Philippines. No? And currently, what is being used to substantiate that claim is a passage in a pamphlet or a book. And that dates the arrival of photography in the Philippines to 1841 or 1842. Here, you would see 1844, diba? So that claim, in terms of the documentation, it says that photography arrived in the Philippines in 1841 or 42, according to John Silva, Jonathan Best, and Juan Guardiola. Sila yung three people who are usually credited, or at least cited for the claim of photography arriving in the Philippines in 1842, 41, 42. So the source, the academic paper wherein you can further research about this is the title of the academic paper is Jules Etier and the Lagren Mission. So si Gilles Massot is a French guy who is living now in Singapore. The research on Jules Etier will be parang establishment of the history of photography, not just in Asia, but also in the world. Jules Etier was traveling for commerce. So Singapore, then India, well, Pondicherry, and then Manila. So there's a different account naman if you go to Juan Guardiola. So that the reason that I'm saying that the source of this claim, or at least this narrative that I'm saying, is that it is the paper of Gilles Massot. If you go to Juan Guardiola, iba naman yung account doon. Just to let you know, since interesting, I mean, at least for me, this is an interesting because we have some basis of the history of photography in the Philippines. So Gilles Massot will be coming also to Photography Chismis. Wow, big time! So he will be a guest to Photography Chismis in July. So naka-schedule kami for July 24, I think. I'll update naman the invite, no. So so big time kasi basically he's writing the history of photography in the world. Well, in Asia first, and then I think what he's working on. So when we talked, sabi ni Jill, if he can make the book, it's actually a history of photography. Yung pag-ikot ng photography sa mundo historically. So that's interesting, no. So and then I found out he's also a teacher, LaSalle teacher naman in Singapore. So interesting. So the things that you discover once you put yourself out there, there's so many things to discover. I mean, imagine that. I feel so involved. So I feel so involved. So imagine mo. So anyway, watch out for that. So Jill Maso will be in Photography Chismis on July. Woo! Okay, so now, yan. So anong ba to? So is this a photograph of the Philippines? No. This is an image created by Louis Daguerre. So, however, this is not the first daguerreotype or first photograph that he made. However, people find value or at least importance to this image. People assign the significance of this image as the first photograph in the world that includes a person in it. When I say that this was politicized as the first photograph with a person in it, I say that again without malice. So I'm not trying to engender any meaning. Pero I'm saying, or at least I'm describing an observation that people have been attributing this as the first. So that idea of as the first, why does it matter? So writers are saying that again, the presence of a person in an image is important. So embedded in that idea that this is the first photograph that has a person in it also speaks volume about the representation of a person in an image. So yun yung important statement here, no? So kung tatanungin, asan dyan, Tony? So ayan, so yung lalaki na yan, based on what is written, ang account here is that a man is having his shoes shined. So parang hindi siya one person but two people. And then siguro you can use that, you can even politicize that, parang servitude and then the capitalism, ganun. So well, you can. I mean, it's up to you, diba? I mean, it's indeterminate. My claim is photography is indeterminate. So it's up to you. But nevertheless, my point is people find value to this image because it is being credited as the first image that has a person in it. So yung point doon is that there is a distinction between the person that is seen in the image and the person who is creating the image. So yun yung emphasis ko lang dito. And another issue with this photograph, you have to understand contextually. Ito na yung visual literacy. Ako, ito yung mga inilalaban namin nila Jess, saka ng Binildo, I mean nila Sir Francis, nila Francis. Is yung visual literacy. When sinasabihin mo sa akin that if this is the first photograph that has a person in it, if I ask you how many people are there, sabihin mo, dalawa yung gusto yan. But if I ask you, are you sure? This is, well, wala pa palang title, no? Yan. So basically, it's Boulevard du Tempo. Hindi ako French. Basahin ko na lang siya na English. No? Boulevard du Temple. But nevertheless, ang point ko lang dito is that if you're going to claim that there are only two people in the image, are you sure? I mean, this is a busy street. This is Paris. There is commerce. There is movement. There's electricity. There's energy in the city. If you put this in context also, you have to remember that this was the period of yung Industrial Revolution, di ba? So yung period of yung late modern period, that's around 200 years, no? So Industrial Revolution happened within that span. So to a certain extent, parang well, that's a separate discussion, yung modernity and photography. But nevertheless, the point is, if you say that there are only two people in this image, there's a question in that statement because you can only see two people. And yet, this is a busy street. So probably we can at least question that idea because probably there are other people in these photographs that are just not seen because of the technology or the affordance of that technology during that time. And what gets recorded are the things or the objects of the world or the furnitures of the world that are fixed or at least in stasis. So kung merong karawahe dyan or for example mga naglalakad dyan, hindi talaga sila makikita kasi may motion blur and because it's around 5 to 20 minutes, well, ito I think 5 to 7 minutes daw to based on literature. That would mean that hindi talaga sila ma-record. I mean, the blur is too blurry for you to see an image. I'm highlighting this because I want people to see that we have to challenge an image. We have to keep on challenging the image. We have to keep on challenging the image. So yeah, so I have so much to say pa, pero let's keep it at that for now. Kasi again, we have to go back to gender representation in photography. So there is a politicization of this image given that people are assigning value to it being the first photograph that has a person in it and or a man in it or two men in it. And yet we have established that again, contextually, there are other people in the image probably because this is a busy street. And then aside from that, the idea of having a person in the image and yet there is a contradistinction and probably parang a relegation of the agent creating the image because that will play a part later in our discussion. No? So the person in the image and the person behind the image. Okay. So tandaan nyo, 1838. Etong image na to, ayan, so lagyan mo natin yung title. So this is Plazuela de San Gabriel since we're coming from that photograph of Louis Daguerre. Since we're coming from that context. So if we go to this image, we can say that this is the first photograph of the Philippines that has people in it. Since we've established that people find value in the distinction of having a person in the image and having no person in the image. And if we're going to read it similarly, if we're going to, introduce na the idea of gender, probably we can look at it and then we will not see any women. There are many people here, but so far, I have not seen, I tried multiple times to look for a woman in the image. So if we're going to create a statement about at least sex, I don't see any females in the image. So again, I'm saying that not as a political statement, but I'm saying that as a condensation of what we're trying to do in this exercise. No? So if I say that there are several people, but there are no women, we have to take note of that statement itself. Wherein when we say there are no women or there are no females, one critical aspect is that how was I looking at, how am I creating a determination of what is a woman in the image or what is a female in the image? And to a certain extent, I was engendering my view of a woman in this image, wherein there is assumption embedded in my statement that a woman dresses differently from a man. In the first place, at this vantage point, it's very hard to make sense or at least make a figuration of their face. So at this distance, if I'm going to look for a man, probably I will be able to create a distinction of a man because of what he wears. And corollary to that is if I find a woman dressed as a woman, from this vantage point, even if I don't see the face, through the appearance of what she wears, I could identify someone as a woman. So embedded in that statement is that I have an engendered, quote unquote, distinction of a man and a woman in relation to how they appear. And that appearance is not necessarily a face, but a form they take on through what they wear. Okay, so that's clear. Okay, secondly, second observation. So ito yung mga historical context. No? If I say that there is no woman here, embedded also in that description, or at least in that statement, that I am looking for a woman in a context of a street. So if I say that I am looking for a woman in this street scene, then probably people would say that you will not see a woman there because that is outside the home or outside the house. So when I look for a woman in the busy street or in this street, in the plazuela, a possible conclusion would be Tony, we will not find a woman there because that is not the place for a woman. I hope you understand that statement. No? So parang ang question is, Tony, you will not find a woman there because that is the streets, that is not the place of a woman during that time. So ngayon, may introduction na of place and time and the identity of a person in the image. We have to be conscious of that. I mean, siguro I have moved away from a basic lecture. Now we're going into parang ano na, medyo malalim na. But, well, I'm here na, so might as well do it. So, supposed to be introductory lang, pero now we're deconstructing images na. But nevertheless, so yun. So again, what we're saying is that in our view of looking for a man and a woman is engendered right away. And that engendering not necessarily is intentional. We are just introducing the idea of context. Since kanina sabi natin, diba, in critical theory, we have to understand context, wherein agency, the art object, and the viewer, it's the space wherein they coalesce. So that's where they interact. So in this case, we're creating meaning out of an image. So therefore, probably we can say that the way that I'm looking for or I'm searching for a woman in an image is also gendered, intentional or not. Historical and geographical context would tell us that at that time, a woman can be distinguished from a man through an appearance, which is the dress, what they wear, and also the place to which an image represents a particular part of reality. We're in a street. So parang yun, so lumalabas na introduction of appearance, place, and time. So, okay, next. This is a contender to being the oldest extant photograph that has a person in it in the Philippines. So yun yung context nito. So, I'm saying that because in 2007, so recently lang, relatively, that image that you saw is part of the Manila daguerreotypes. This set of 18 daguerreotypes were discovered in the US. Paano napunta yan sa US? In 2007. Ironic nito yung backstory nito. Nakalagay siya sa isang kahon, tapos yung kahon na yun nasa isang cabinet, nandun lang sa isang tabi. Tapos hindi nila pinapansin, tapos binuksan nila, sabi nila, wait, photographs to ah. Okay, tapos binuksan nila, wait, baka Philippines to. Tapos doon nagsimula yung entire process na yun. So imagine mo, a part of our history was just in a box in the US, in a cabinet. I'm saying that to give a connotation of history being accidental in the sense na what we think of historical seem to be an idea of contestability. We have to keep on challenging the image. If these images were never found, part of our history will never be substantiated visually. Probably we can get some accounts, verbal accounts, textual accounts, and yet to have a visual representation of that history embedded or at least fixed or at least demonstrated in the medium of a photograph, that could have been lost knowledge. It could have been lost history if these images were never found. So it also seemed to be the indeterminacy of history. Yung thesis ko, not thesis, pero yun, the indeterminacy of history itself. If this was not discovered, what statements can we make about the history of Philippine photography in the Philippines itself? Parang nagbasa ka ng mystery story and then nahanap ng wow, ng discovery. So yun, so these photographs were only discovered in 2007. So fairly contemporary and fairly recent. Imagine that. Again, these are photographs of the Philippines in the 1840s. And I have to emphasize that they don't have an exact date yet because images at that time didn't come with metadata. Wala yung mga dates. If you don't have other context wherein you can place a photograph, the time and place wherein these images are representing a part of reality can just be anywhere. It can be anytime. If you don't cross-reference these images with a certain context, which is time, place, history, textual evidences, diba? So for example, pag nakita mo yan out of the blue to images to, paano mo sabihin na 1840s yan? Even the determination of that 1840s currently is not yet set in stone. It's still being studied because when they found these images, it was nagde-deteriorate na siya. Again, they didn't know it was there. And now, well, they already had a lot of archiving and also restoration process done to this. So you can find the paper online. Actually, I got it online lang. Imagine mo kung di ako mag-research, di ko malalaman tong mga to, diba? Wala naman turo sa akin dito sa school eh. Diba? So parang I'm doing this also na yung the next generation of photographers would know, talaga? I mean, I hope. Kasi just only a few conservationists would know and a few teachers would know the history of the Manila daguerreotypes and the context to how it was discovered or where it was discovered and the manner how it was read. Okay, so gumagana yung kape. Anyway, so yun. Since hindi pa na-determine yung talagang yung provenance nitong images na to, currently, yung claim na medyo na-establish is that these are also images by Jules Itier. So yun yung context nito. As of now, the institution who found this, the Spanish institution in America. And in relation to that, they don't know who created this. Kaya sabi natin provenance, so who created it, time, date, place. Well, actually ngayon meron ng idea kasi I think in the labels nakasulat yung Laguna, Manila proper, Manila District, and Marikina. Pero the first thing to do was really to protect it from further deterioration. However, what's interesting in that idea that it's indeterminate, despite of people attributing these images to Jules Itier, is that there is still openness that if in case it is determined that these images were taken prior to 1841 or 1844, kasi parang they're saying na 1844 yan kasi si Jules Itier yan. Kita nyo parang it's a circular process of confirmation wherein, yan wala tayong date. Pero we have records of Jules Itier doing photography in the Philippines. Probably, these are images by Jules Itier. And the original framings have an insignia. Parang yung brand. Meron kasi mga brands din kasi yung framing. No? The frame itself, may logo doon. And then that logo can be traced to the studio or the framer of Jules Itier. So you can read about it. Interesting siya. So currently, parang nangyayari, the confirmation, or at least they're attributing these images to Jules Itier just because we don't have other references and just because of what? A logo on a frame? Kasi same framer siya ni Jules Itier and then we're saying that it's also Jules Itier. So parang may jump, diba? Parang mayroong jump on the claim. But nevertheless, as of now, that's how history works. And given that, since hindi pa siya na-determine finally na yung provenance nito, if in case lang, it is proven that these were not from Jules Itier but used a frame, supply, again, the term supplier, because it also ties into the corporate establishment or the structure of what we think of photography. We don't necessarily take note of that. The structure, the corporate structure, or the commercial structure wherein photography is built on, or at least which facilitates photography. You have to be conscious of that. So if in case someday we'll be able to prove that no, it's not Jules Itier who did this, despite of the photographer or the agent who created this having the same supplier of the frame, there is possibility that these images could be the oldest images in Asia. Or it could be, well, not in the world obviously kasi meron ng France, no? This could be the oldest images of Asia. Not just the Philippines, but of Asia. So napansin mo doon sa statement ko na there is also a politics of place in the sense na bakit gusto natin mauna na we have, the Philippines has the oldest photograph of Asia as compared to China and India. So mga kalaban natin is Singapore kasi si Jules Itier doon unang naglanding. So established na Singapore muna unang nagkaroon ng photography. Well, at least extant kasi nga sabi natin, no, Philippines kasi 1841 nandito na si Sinibaldo Dimas, no. So kaya may politics of place din. Sino ba na una nagkaroon ng photography in Asia? So the politics of place. So yun. So if just in case in the future it becomes proven or it is substantiated that these photographs were not of Jules Itier but could probably have used the framer of Jules Itier, and for some reason they were able to prove na no, it came from someone else, then there's a possibility that this could be the oldest photographs, not just of the Philippines, but of Asia. So may ano. So parang akalabanin natin si Pondicherry. Kasi nga si Jules Itier, Singapore, Pondicherry, and then Manila. And then in China also kasi I talked to John Silva. So sabi niya around 1840s may mga itinerant photographers na or daguerreotypists moving around China and Indo-Pacific. So marami na nangyayaring photography in Asia. So yung itinerant photographers, meaning they're moving, they're shooting a lot of things around Asia na, no? But nevertheless, so as of now, we are limited to our claims based on what is documented and is available knowledge. So, ayun. So interesting lang siya. Yan. So yan. So nakasa dyan, photographer are known. Pero as of now, people are attributing these images, the Manila daguerreotype, to Jules Itier. So I'm going to ask this to Gilles when we have our podcast. So year 1840s because as of now, provenance is unclear. Okay. So now, pag pinatabi natin sila, since we're talking about the politics of place, politics of time, politics of identity. So side by side, what we're looking at are the first photographs in France or Paris that has a person in it, pero may asterisk on that claim. And the first photograph in the Philippines that has people in it. So looking at this, we can have a contentious claim that these are the first photographs with people in it in Manila and in Paris with asterisk. Tapos maliban pa doon, I have to emphasize that photography, when it was announced in 1839 in France, just after 2 years or 2 to 4 years, nasa Pilipinas na siya. Regardless of who brought it, either si Sinibaldo Dimas or so si Jules Itier or probably some Chinese guy or some Indian guy. Okay, hindi racist yun. I'm just saying their country of origin. So, if we're going to say that 1839 in-announce, nag-product launch, sa France, and then 1840s, nandito na sa Pilipinas yung photography. Then, therefore, we can say that there is a rich history of photography in the country wherein we can trace the discussion or the discourse right from the start that is not too different, at least temporarily, from how it started in the West. Because currently, most of the discussions is that photography is a Western construct. When in fact, yes, probably, but the experience of photography is not. So if we're going to view this side by side, what we're saying is that I would like to emphasize that the history of photography in the West and in the East were simultaneous. If you're saying no, they're not simultaneous because there are 2 years difference or 2 to 4 years depending on which document you're basing your statement. Nevertheless, after the introduction, it was existing at the same time. However, there's going to be a big difference because in the West, there is the idealization of photography in a certain way. And in the Philippines, I'm not even going to talk about Asia, I'm just going to talk about the Philippines. Photography in the Philippines, even if they were simultaneously happening, the experience of photography in the West is different from the experience of photography in the Philippines. So that would be a topic of a separate lecture in the sense that the aesthetic values that is being created in photography in the West is different from the ethnographic value of photography in the East and specifically in the Philippines. No? So ethnographic encounter with photography and the aesthetic encounter with photography in the West. Okay, so going back. So yun ini-establish lang natin yan, yung connection na yun na we can claim that photography happened to us at the same time as Europe, but the experience are different. So yun yung line na yun. And siguro lastly, you have to remember the historical context wherein a round trip from Europe to Manila and back takes around 2 years. So the source of that information, it's also in Photography Chismis, no? Where is that statement coming from? Yung duration of the travel from Europe to Philippines and back, or at least Europe to Asia, which is malaking Asia, pero at least Southeast Asia, and then back. So that round trip takes 2 years. And within 2 to 4 years, it was already here. So parang sabay lumabas ng photography sa West at saka sa East. No? So I keep on emphasizing the idea of the simultaneity of photography in the East and the West, and yet the encounters are very, very different. Okay. So now, since we're still in the topic of gender representation in Philippine photography, the next closest from the images of 1840s. The next that I was able to find is this. So this image is a PR scene. I'll show you the book. I mean, I'll share you the book naman, the source of this image later, no? But this is dated circa, yan, yung CA, that's circa 1860. So, the book or the monograph wherein I got this is the Colonial Imaginary by Juan Guardiola. So that's just in 2007. So far from aside from the 1840s images that I showed you, this is the next oldest. So similarly, if we're going to look for gender representation in this image, if you look at the image here, so the statement that I emphasized a while ago, the way that I'm going to look for representation of a woman in this image is an engendered way, in the sense that I am looking for a woman not because of face or identity, but because of appearance. True appearance, I mean. So the way that I can identify a woman here is through an appearance. Because biologically, I cannot check the genitalia, I cannot check the face, I cannot check the hormones, but I can see a person, quote unquote, based on their appearance through what they wear, to the configuration of their outwardly appearance. So is that an engendered statement? Probably, because we are also introducing the idea that there is a binary distinction on how a woman or a female dresses and how a male dresses. Again, we're in the discussion of appearance. No? One is the appearance, and number two is the context, the geographical, historical context wherein we are looking for a woman. Presupposes if I do not see a woman here, probably the idea is that you will not find a woman there because that is a place wherein historically there are no women there. Women are at home, diba? But if I find a woman here somewhere, sabihin na probably a woman was participating in Philippine economy at that time in the 1860s. I'm emphasizing that I'm making the statement based on the photographs because when we go to the textual references, what is written in history, there are already mentions of women participating in economy, no, obviously. But since we're talking about photography in the Philippines, as of now, wala pa nakikitang quote-unquote babae. But embedded in that statement is the distinction of appearance of a man and a woman. And then number two is the historical and geographical context wherein we are making that search. Pero since I cannot cover that the entire history of photography in the Philippines, look for this online. I mean, I am not sure why people don't try to do it. Siguro walang interest siguro sa history. But nevertheless, this book, you can look for this. So just to summarize, what is the comment or at least the assessment of how photography was practiced in the Philippines based on history, we can say that photographic applications were varied. So photographs were both ethnographic and anthropological, but there was also industrial documentation, which we have seen in the case of Itier. So nakita rin natin yung ties with commerce, colonization, power, the photographic image. So yun yung mga connections, no? And then you have also at the same time, so you can look at the book, you can search it in the book. There were already practitioners of landscape photography. That's interesting. So mayroon ng photographs of sceneries. We can say that the idea that photography was used in the Philippines simply for ethnographic purposes, that could be a bit reductive because you would already see, well, not Filipinos, so you would see in this book, Westerners. I'm not going to say colonizer because some of them are not Spanish, probably their presence in the Philippines were just a product of what they do as businessmen, as visitors. But there were already people who were shooting landscapes and sceneries. And there are also examples of disaster photographs. So meron ng documentary practice. So if you're going to trace the usage of photography in the Philippines, there's already disaster photographs, earthquakes, meron ng photographs nun. So there's also in studio photographs. So yung carte de visite, aside from the carte de visite, meron pang ibang examples of studio photography that were existent in history in the 1860s, 1870s, 1880s. So if we claim that photography was just for ethnographic and colonial purposes, that might be a bit reductive if you go back to this context, or at least this text, at least this source. No? So we have to qualify that as teachers. But if you're going to say that photography has been used for power, in relation to power, and the demonstration of power, yes, I would agree. But I'm just saying that when we talk about photography and the discourse of photography and the presence of photography in the Philippines, to say that it's all about ethnographic photographs, that might be a bit reductive. And there are also war photographs. If you go to this book, there are also war photographs of the Philippines. There's even forensic photography in this book. So interesting siya. So again, the cut-off here, this is, I think, 19th century. So hindi yan hanggang 2023. So we're talking about 19th century photography. So 19th century photography. Walang 20th century photography dyan. American War. Tapos maliban pa doon, the good thing about this book it also shows the presence of photography not just in Manila. It also shows other parts of the Philippines wherein photography was present. So you have North Luzon, you have Mindanao, you have Central Luzon, you have Visayas, and inclusive of the Visayas is the photographs of Felix Laureano. He was in Barcelona. The book was in Barcelona. And yet, the subject or the content is Iloilo yung content ng photographs niya. I would recommend this to teachers so that at least when we make claims about the presence of photography in the Philippines, we're not limited with saying that it's just about ethnography. No, there are so much layers, or at least there is a simultaneity of photographic practice, frameworks, applications, conceptions of what photography is at similar points in time. It's actually simultaneous na nangyayari. So may nangyayaring war photography, may disaster photography, may war photography, merong studio photography. So yun, maganda siyang basis if you want to create this course of photography in the Philippines. So check it out. This is a book and also a monograph of an exhibit in 2007. Imagine mo, no, parang history ng photography, parang 2007 lang nasimulan talagang pagsamasamahin. So, yun. So it was done by Juan Guardiola. So you can look for it. Okay. So nag-jump tayo ng konti. So let's do a jump, no? So magta-time jump tayo. So since we cannot cover it chronologically from 1841 up to the present, so just look for that book or that monograph. So now we go to 2022. This is John Silva, no? So the talk was the end of the post and the rise and demise of studio photography. The interesting part here is that John's talk is about studio photography, and yet it covered so many things. So you can check the recording, the video material online. So you go to Museo ng Kaalamang Katutubo. They have a channel in YouTube. I'm saying that because we tend to dismiss YouTube, and yet part of our history is being created or at least being told in YouTube by experts. So if ask sino ba si John Silva, siya lang naman ang executive director ng Ortigas Library. No? So currently he's the executive director of the Ortigas Library. He used to be a consultant for the National Museum. Siguro in the parlance of fandom. So he's a rock star, or at least yung for the teachers who are interested about the history of photography in the Philippines. He's one of our rock stars. So if you check all the books, at least in the history of Philippine photography, he's always there in the footnotes. Parang siya talaga tatakbo ng tao pagdating sa history ng photography sa Philippines. So John Silva, and also his partner, si Jonathan Best. So again, so gendered na yung line na yun kasi sinabi ko na his partner, Jonathan Best. And I'm not saying it as a pejorative. It's actually just a description that John is a gay man, or he's gay. Sorry din sa imprecision of my terms, no? But he's gay. So my question is that important in his role as the executive director for the Ortigas Library for us to mention it? So you have to ask that also. So I'm not going to answer, but I'm going to emphasize that if I say that John is a gay man and we say that identity as gay, what is the relationship of that identity, of that introduction of John and his partner in relation to his work? So I'm not going to answer it, but the question is, can we come up with statements that would describe that relationship between your sexual identity, your sexuality in relation to the work that you do as the executive director of the Ortigas Library? So I will not comment, no, but be conscious of that. Is there purpose for me to say that? Probably yes, because in relation to the conversation of gender representation and Philippine photography. However, the value of saying it's up to you. We can open the discussion on April 28th. Is there reason for us to mention the sex and also the gender of a person in relation to the work that he or she does? So yun yung mga question. No? So one of the photographs that he presented is this one. I think most of you also know about these photographs. This is the Sangli woman, or Mestiza de Sangli. Wala pa naman yung way. So yan, so nag-auto-correct na naman. Based on documents, it's a photograph made by Francisco Van Camp. So around 1875, again, the circa, because again, the things didn't come with dates. But nevertheless, when we look at the image in semiology, you can describe it denotatively. You can also describe it connotatively. An image conjures meaning, whether it is first order meaning or second order meaning, or first order reality or second order reality. So those are the technical terms for semiotics, yung connotation, denotation, signifier, and signifier. I'm saying that for the teachers. So this is an interesting photograph because of the context where it was discovered. So the one who discovered this is John Silva. Pero instead of me telling the story of this photograph, let's have John talk about it. Wow, talagang guess natin si John, no? Okay, so let's play this.
Aha, this is the photograph that I found. And before I found this photograph in 1985, no one ever saw this photograph. None in the Philippines at all. I found this in 1985 in the Musée de l'Homme in Paris. I had come to take a look at their photo collection, the Philippine photo collection. They said they had none, and I was so outraged. And I said, no, you had, because you had French archaeologists who came and to the Philippines and collected photographs. They said no, and then so I decided, look, show me your photographs of Tahiti and your French islands in the Pacific. So they did. They showed me all. They gave me all these boxes and boxes and boxes. And for the next 5, 6 days, I was at my desk, given to me, with a window view of the Eiffel Tower. And I was totally upset that here I am doing all this research, and there's the Eiffel Tower, and I'm trying to think about how to get there. So, but there I was, leafing through every photograph of grass skirts and grass skirts and grass skirts and grass skirts, until bingo. Usually it has to be on the last day, the last box, I see this photograph. And I said to myself, this is not a grass skirted lady. So I looked, and sure enough, it says Sangli Filipina, Chinese Filipina. And there she is in the most incredible, sensual, radiant form. Her hair flowing down on both sides, looking like she had just taken a bath, or it's wet with coconut oil. But whatever it is very sensual. You know, it's that moment when people say, "You are bagong ligo. You've just taken a bath," and my God, that brings a lot of sexual signals. She's got no chemise on, which means my gosh, she's even more revealing than the usual. She has her fan half open, which again, through sexual signaling, means that she's open to being approached. But I don't know whether she could really be approached, because I have a feeling that she was actually a courtesan, a a lady of leisure. Because I don't know how you could be this beautiful, this open, this daring, and yet be sort of be in somebody's, with a family, with a very severe family. No, I think she was already pretty much on her own. So this is when I discovered this, I immediately said, when I went back to the Philippines, I said, I distributed it open. It's all ours. So now this photograph is is now all over the place, and I'm very happy that it is shared. This is a sort of an antithesis of that one. Both photographs and several others that will follow are attributed to Francisco Van Camp, who had a studio in Escolta. This is a woman who is now totally modest. Her hair is up in a pusod, so that there's no sense of, and nobody gets sexually excited about her hair. Both her hands are tucked in her sleeve, again, so that nobody will get so excited about her hands. She's fully clothed. She's looking afar. She has a dainty smile. She's totally sexless, but so it is.
Okay. So yun, so did you notice anything dun sa the description of John? Somehow, I think it's safe to say that when he was reading the image, it was illustrated that meanings were coming from networks of meanings and appearances. So in the sense that when he tried to describe that person in the image, again, he was at the same time describing a photograph and the person in the photograph. So in a way, in that reading, the appearance is the person. As you would have noticed, now that you are actually looking at images, distinctions, categorizations, particularities are not necessarily distinct. They're not determinate. They are indeterminate. And then in the process of you looking at that image, that is the only time that meanings are created when you look at it. The question is, did you notice anything in the way that John was talking about the images? So the way that John was reading an image was based on appearances. So remember the hands, the wet look, the hair, tapos yung contradistinction between the Sangli woman and the quote-unquote sexless woman that came after. Ang sabi niya, diba, the woman is sexless, and then ang sabi niya is yung hands nakatago para hindi maging inviting. The hair is nakapusod, so para hindi siya nakakaakit. At ang sabi ni John, that is the antithesis of the Sangli woman, and the Sangli woman probably is the antithesis of the other woman. So, as you can see, appearances creates a network of meanings. And in relation to this example, you have to understand that all these statements or value judgments that John was making in relation to a photograph and quote unquote engendering the appearance or the identity of a woman, it was all temporalized in the sense that he's basing these comments from a personal subjective perspective, and yet he is commenting about a photograph or photographs that happened in 1875, yung Sangli woman. So appearances, there is a persistence. Is there a persistence of the appearance across time and the meaning remains the same? Or is the meaning that John is making from the appearances based on his historiographical specificity, meaning John is now living in 2022. I mean, he was doing this reading or this lecture or this talk in 2022. Is there anything from the specificity of his time and place in the Philippines, living at this time and place as a gay man, does it have anything to do with the way he's reading an image that seems to have persisted through time because of a photograph? Meaning from 1875, when that image was taken, and reading it in 2023, the question is, the appearance seem to be the same since it's in the form of a photograph. So there is a permanency or facticity of the image itself. However, the question is, when John reads the image in 2022, when he was doing the lecture, and the specificity of him being gay and all the identity that he carries and the work that he does as an executive director of the Ortigas Library, does it have something to do with the way he reads that appearance that has persisted from 1875? So I hope meron kayong mga comments about it, no? So kasi kung hindi, parang I failed in my aim to build that idea in your head. Pero among the network of meanings through appearances, I would just highlight, did Van Camp have the same reading of the subject, the woman in front of the camera, when he was doing it in his studio, as compared to the way John is reading the image or the person represented in the image in 2022? Is there any difference? Are they the same? So yun yung mga questions din. No? Take note of one argument. So maraming network of meaning. Pero just take note of one argument. John mentioned something about the work of that woman, of the Sangli woman. He said that he feels that there is something different with the Sangli woman, because how can a person that beautiful be too independent and appear to be independent because she was able to access photography. Again, mahal ang photography no time na yun. No? Then maliban pa doon, sinabi rin na there is a judgment created on the Sangli woman because of the way she dresses. Wala siyang kamisa. Yun yung sinabi ni John, na critical to his judgment of that woman's identity and roles and position, work, her wealth, position in society. And it was all derived from an appearance, and specifically that appearance was from the kamisa. Among many things, ang laking bagay nung kamisa na yun. Kasi nung sinabi ni John na nung wala yung kamisa, baka courtesan siya, di ba? So again, there's no value judgment on the work of a courtesan, di ba? I mean, well, I'm saying that neutrally. What I'm saying is that the connection that is created, or the connection that is being highlighted by John from an appearance of the missing kamisa and the roles of that person in relation to her work, her wealth, and position in society, even the sexuality of that woman, just because of an appearance, because of the lack of the kamisa. So I'm asking this with no malice. No? So again, I'm trying to be neutral. And also, John is a friend. So I'm asking these questions without malice. I have worked with John in Silver Lens before, and I have been asking him things also about history of photography. So he's been one of my main sources as a colleague. Siguro let's say na lang colleague. Huwag na naman friend, masabihin yung feeling ako masyado, feeling close. So let's say na lang na colleague in the practice of photography in the Philippines. So I'm making these questions not to malign John. I'm just saying this in relation to appearance, gender, and representation. So I found this online. Kasi diba kasi si John kanina sabi niya, I found this in Paris. Ang ganda ng narrative din kasi parang wala siyang mahanap na photograph of the Philippines, and he was in Paris doing his research, and then on the last day, he found finally this is not a Tahitian, kasi nga the French were going around the world. It was the age of colonization, so they were in different places in the world creating colonies. And then Tahiti was one. But the Philippines was also, well, the Philippines was not a colony. However, they were doing anthropological work, diba? During that time, the French were the ones who, they had photography, and then they were going around the world photographing, diba? But nevertheless, ako naman, nakita ko to, parang 3 days ago. I discovered it. So, gagawa rin ako ng kwento. So, I found this photograph. Actually, gumagawa ako ng lecture about gender. And then, suddenly, on the last day when I was going to present, I found this. online, di ba? So, medyo ganun yung, yung trajectory naman ng kwento ko. Pero, look at the image. As you can see, with the introduction of colorization of photographs, remember where that hypothesis of John was hinged on? Is just the kamisa. And now looking at it, polarized, you would see that the Sangli woman was, kasi parang ang comment kasi ni John is that, kasi nga, revealing. And when you look at this, it's not revealing. I mean, she was wearing something. And yet, that conclusion came from the idea that she wasn't wearing a kamisa. So this just highlights the idea of appearance and engendering and representation. When we look at this image, probably revealing. Kasi nga, you cannot see it because the technology at that time, the daguerreotype, cannot distinguish color as much. I mean, syempre may contrast, diba? May density of the accretion dun sa image. Pero here, hindi mo siya mapansin. Pero pag kinolorize mo na siya, then suddenly, wait, parang may something missing yata na yung sa hypothesis ni John. And to think that the entire judgment or hypothesis or observation of John was an appearance, a gendered conception of a Filipina, of the Sangli woman, of this specific image. And looking at it here, well, actually, hindi ko pa sinasabihan si John. I have to tell him, no? I'm going to message him. So, John, so I think I used your lecture for my lecture, no? Pero yun nga. So, again, do you see how interesting and siguro probably unstable, kaya I'm always going to indeterminacy and instability of appearances. Appearances are unstable. Imagine, in case lang, that commentary, that hypothesis of John, being an executive director, being a historian, being the discoverer of that photograph, he was the one who saw that. He was the one who found that image. So take note of that, no? He found that image. So he is in a place to comment because I found it, I can comment on it. I mean, in the first place, all of you will not be able to see this if I wasn't able to find this. No, napansin niyo rin dun sa language that, I mean, that tone that John was showing in the way when he was speaking, there was a certain pride in a discovery of history. Sabi niya parang prior to 1985, no one has seen this photograph, and now it's spread everywhere. It's all over the place. And I'm happy to have done it. So there is a certain pride, diba? So does that have any relation to gender? I do not know. So kaya I always highlight the idea of instability and indeterminacy. But nevertheless, again, so just to summarize, no? So imagine if that comment of John, because of his status as the executive director of the Ortigas Library, being a researcher, a historian, every one of us, kami mga teachers that wants to write things about photography in the Philippines, we always go back to him. He's a rock star for us. He's a rock star for us, teachers. And yet, imagine kung naisulat yung commentary niya about this image and that got written in a book. There will be generations of teachers like me who would use that commentary as a value judgment across time. We will teach it to our students and the students will probably create a meaning, a value status in their head regarding this image and what is gender and woman and what are roles and relation of roles and genders and the wealth of a woman. That was created and that would have been created across generations if I'm not going to emphasize that it seems that entire hypothesis of John might be limited or misinformed because of the nature of the photograph itself, wherein there is no contrast between the skin of the woman and the white camisa. So I'm not going to blame John. I'm just going to say that he was creating a hypothesis based on appearance, which is led by the limitations of the photographic image. So in this case, di mo nga naman makita, diba? So pero pag digital mo na siya, wait, diba? So yan. So yun yung point nito na to, slide na to. You can look for this, I saw this online. So ayan yung credit, So yun yung point na in relation to history and appearances. Okay. So since we're in the topic of John, so I have to give credit to John. Again, he's a rock star for teachers, no? For photography teachers. And he was very nice to me when I was telling him before na I wanted to do a lecture on gender. Sabi niya, what's your address? Sabi ko, why? Sabi niya, I'm going to send you my book. And then he sent me this book for free. That's how nice John is, no? I mean, again, we know each other. So colleague. So, and he sent me this book. And this book is a book he created from his collections of photographs of male affection. So historical photos, mid-century photographs na. I have the book here. Yeah. So yun yung proof. I am holding it in I'm holding the book here in my hand, so you can see it in the video. No? So this is the book that that John sent me. So he was nice enough to give me a copy. So thank you, John. So nevertheless, so this book naman that he created, this is this is a book, but it is also sort of a monograph when he had an exhibit in Silver Lens. And Silver Lens again, it's run by Isa and and racial, no? So that's another, they will come up in the presentation as well. So they're also a gay couple, tama ba? Okay, sorry, please correct me na lang in the comments, no? They're a couple. And then John and Jonathan Best are also couples. And then they were close friends. Part of the interaction, there was an exhibit about affection. So if you're going to say na ideologically motivated yung exhibit, I will not make that determination. So I don't have enough information about it to make a claim. And again, I think it's not productive as of now to make any claim na the exhibit was motivated by an ideological basis, which is gender, diba? So to have an exhibit na related to gender. But nevertheless, this book and the entire thesis of this book is that you will find in historical photos in the Philippines a characterization or a demonstration of male affection. So mapapansin mo dito, first half of the 20th century. Yan pala nakasulat pa dito. So that means 1900 up to mid-century. Also, that's around 1950s, diba? Mid-century, 20th century. Yeah. So yan, to clarify. So yan yung laman ng book. And then if you read it, so basically you will see photos of men, quote unquote, showing affection. So there's also a claim here that, the title itself, it says that a token of friendship. So here, I'll go to the slide. A token of friendship. There's a connection about affection and friendship. However, when you read it, it seems as if the affection and the friendship is a bit more fluid. Kasi there are friendships, and there's also, I think, some claims of John in the book and also in the exhibit that some friendships or affections were more than friendships in the sense that they were lovers, I guess. So yun yung part of the story. So yan, so mapapansin nyo as an example here, no? So one is seated and then one is standing. So parang merong, well, this could be aesthetic also. You can say that this could be aesthetic na parang, again, pag na-photograph tayo, as much as possible, hindi firing squad. So in studio photography, there's also a rule na dapat merong leveling, 'di ba? That's basic photography, no? Basta hindi dapat flat. So hindi siya firing squad. So dapat merong nasa taas, may nasa baba para yung mata mo gumagalaw din. So may movement ng mata. So in this case, in studio photography, rarely will you find firing squad, meaning magkakatabi nakatayo, tapos nakatayo lang sila tapos flat, walang galaw. Dito may kita mo, may elevation, 'di ba? So may pababa. So parang yung mata mo, you look at this face and then you look at this face and then there are aesthetic judgments that we can make in the sense na there is a contrast of the white and the dark parts. And then you have the yung background, di ba? Anong kalimutan ko dito? Si Sir J mas magaling dito sa akin kasi nga historian siya, no? So Sir J will also have an episode. So Roderick Javier. Nevertheless, ang point lang dito is that at least in the face, the reason that studio photographs are also shot this way is that to provide some movement to your eye. Hindi baduy. Siguro kung language natin baduy or parang parang Pero for studio photography, remember the formula for studio photography is that there should be a movement in your eyes. Given na the subjects themselves are static, they're seated. So you have to create elevation, diba? May levels. So yan. Pero besides the elevation, if we read this semiotically, as John have said, and I'm not making the claim, it's written in the front page of the book. As John is saying, there is a conveyance, that's a better word. There is a conveyance of affection and friendship. So yan, so up to that point na lang muna. Okay, so given that, so how do you distinguish a relationship of friendship and affection? If I'm going to have a picture with my friends, guys, I will not have a photo taken of me this way, diba? So again, that's not homophobia. I'm just saying that's not my identity. So to clarify lang baka sabihin nyo kasi si Tony, dinidiscuss niya gender, baka ano. I'm saying that naman as a clarification. So I'm not homophobic. I'm just saying that that's not my identity. So to clarify lang, baka mamaya kasi isipin, siguro di pa nag-aasawa si Tony. Naghanap mo. Basta mahabang story. Siyempre, naging personal bigla, no? Pero yun lang. Again, photography for me is personal. So baka lang ma-associate din yung gender ko with the topic that I'm covering. Pero I'm not saying that naman to say that I'm homophobic. I'm saying that because that is not my identity. Similarly, if someone is gay and then isipin natin na straight, hindi rin sila comfortable, no? So similarly, ako rin, I'm not stating that na I will not have a photograph of my guy friend like this. That's not an utterance of disgust. Baka mamaya kasi masyado ka naman, ano. So that's not disgust that I'm saying. I'm saying that that's not my identity from the externalities. Kaya kaya sabi ko na parang I use the idea of performativity instead of a male gaze because baka mamaya yung externalities titingin na parang walang asawa yan si Tony, di ba? So tapos topic niya gender. Baka di ba? So yun yan, kina-clarify ko lang. So yun. So it's not just John. Ngayon, mag-cross-reference tayo kasi part of historical analysis is cross-referencing. Ayan so at least for the teachers. So I'm now cross-referencing. So I'm cross-referencing aside from John, now we're going to someone else. So you know naman ang Beto Campo, di ba? So since we're talking about contemporary photography, these images are not contemporary photography, but they were made available to the public contemporarily. Meaning, yung post ni Ambeto Campo is just March 9. I mean, 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks ago. So, bagong-bago. Bagong information. And, as you would see here, medyo may similarity dun sa book ni John. Diba? So, may elevation. I mean, aesthetically, reading it aesthetically, or visual analysis, pwede nating sabihin na similar yung aesthetics. At least the visual load is similar because there is elevation. Both are quote-unquote male, and the structure of the image is also similar, and the material itself is also similar. The material itself. Although I think I'll double check. Glass negatives na pala to. So I think glass negatives din yung iba dito. Glass negatives na. So yan. So para lang dun sa mga technical, yung sa technical aspect, glass negatives na yung ginamit dito. So may negative ka dito. Itong nasa look at the cursor. Itong glass negative siya. Is your positive. What you're seeing right now, the material, when you go to the technology or the material being used, it's glass negatives. So aside from negatives, marami to. So kaya sabi ko, ang daming pwede pag-usapan sa photography, di tayo maubusan. Again, I'm just cross-referencing the images of John with the images posted by Ambeth just recently, so 3 weeks ago. So similar yung visual load. However, basahin niyo yung caption. It's interesting yung caption. So again, it's still studio photography. However, these two persons are quote-unquote important because this is Fernando Amorsolo, who yung nakatayo. And then, yung nakaupo is Guillermo Tolentino. So both of them are national artists. Interesting, no? I mean, both of them are national artists, and there's a photograph in front of us when they were young. And interesting because Amorsolo was a painter, and then Guillermo was a sculpture naman. National artist sila pareho. Ang commentary dito is that it's similar. I mean, the idea of affection. Well, yun nga. Kasi John made a statement that it's a conveyance of affection, visual conveyance of affection, and quote-unquote friendship. But when you go here, so probably we can say similarly, Fernando Amorsolo and Guillermo Tolentino, close friends in UP, School of Fine Arts. So they're friends. So now, should we extend some conclusions other than friendship? I do not know. Again, we're in the level of appearances. That's why I'm saying that the concept of gender and appearances in photography, it's a multi-layered discussion. So in this case, I do not know. I will not comment because I do not know the background. So the only way to find out is cross-referencing also other sources, no? So that's how history works. It's not just making one conclusion from one material or one instance in history. You have to cross-reference it. So kasama yan sa research process. Okay. So, next naman photo. So since medyo may nakakatuwa kasi you follow Ambeto Campo para at least interesting ngayon, ang daming photographs na pinopost ni Ambeto Campo. So going back, so aside from this photograph of Fernando Amorsolo and Guillermo Tolentino is the one, since we said that he's a national artist for sculpture, this is Guillermo Tolentino, the one in orange, yung binox ko na siya. So this is a photograph of Guillermo Tolentino, and well, hindi sinabi hindi sinabi ni Ambet kung anong relationship niya with the two other people. But based on this comment by at least the caption of Ambeth is that it could be believed that this man, the one on the right, right natin, is the model for the oblation. Okay, so aside from the visual load or at least the signifiers of that convey or at least carry the message, the visual load. And here parang ang pinaka idea is the affection or the friendship or relationship. We go here, it seems may konting shift because here naman, ang usapan is not necessarily relationships, but roles and aesthetics. In the sense na pag sinabi aesthetics is somehow we can gather the idea that the point, at least the visual rhetoric here, is not about relationships. It's about presenting or projecting beauty through the bodily form. So in the sense that I think, again, kasi nga, I'm coming from the perspective of photography and then as a quote-unquote art teacher na rin si feeling, no? But nevertheless, we can say that this image, the visual load here, the visual rhetoric also taken by whoever took this because wala namang credits, is that the emphasis is on the form, the bodily form, the aesthetics, diba? Of the bodily form of a man, of a male. And based on the comment also, so interestingly, that's Tolentino who sculpted the oblation. And ang sabi nga, probably itong guy na to is the model for this, diba? So, ang comment ko dito would be, this could ask the question of, in terms of the claim that in Philippine photography, the body of a woman becomes a subject of form instead of a subject of agency. That could question. Well, again, yun nga, medyo unsafe to say that. But nevertheless, we're just saying that, oh sige, let's not focus on the woman muna. Kaya nga yun nga we have to be academic or at least rational about it. So since walang woman, let's not make any comments about woman. What we just comment on what we see. So looking at these photos, what we're saying is that the male body, or at least the bodily form of a man, is shown here as an object of beauty. Which, pag sinabi nyo, masyado naman yatang stretch yun. Well, are you looking at the other photo? That's the oblation. Siyempre may symbolic meaning yan, di ba? So, if taga UP ka, sabihin nga na, basically, it's you offering yourself to the country, di ba? Yun yung part of the idea of the oblation. So, you're naked, you're offering yourself to the country, buong buo, ino-offer mo yung sarili mo sa bansa mo. But part of it is the aesthetic load, which is it's a male's body. So yun. So we cannot comment on the female form yet kasi nga wala namang female dito. So so tabi muna natin yan. Pero at least in a way we can comment on things similar to that, na there is a projection of the aesthetics or idealization of the male form as something beautiful, something good to look at. That statement, that's coming from, that statement I will not change. However, when we say that, when we make that statement, you have to be aware that not all males would be comfortable in saying that. Lalo na photographers. Mamaya makikita natin, mga photographers, gusto nila pinipicture ng babae, hindi lalaki. Pag pinicture mo kapwa mo lalaki, tapos picture mo ng ganyan, may mga engendered questions. Kaya, if we're going to say, is there any body judgments of what is gender in these photographs? Probably yung neutral is aesthetic form, the form of the bodily form of a man. However, to state or to say that in public, probably not all males or not all straight males or cis men, not all cis men will be comfortable saying that in public, that there is a demonstration of the male form. It's beautiful. Medyo hindi lahat magiging comfortable saying that na. Okay. So, popular media.